The room was a high-security federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but audio was being broadcast live for national media, a rare decision made by the judge herself. She wanted people to hear what was coming. Kash Patel, former Chief of Staff of the Department of Defense, sat quietly at the defense table. His posture was calm. His suit was sharp. His eyes? Focused. Across the room, Judge Dana Everston, sharp-jawed, polished, and known for her merciless adherence to national security protocol, adjusted her glasses and prepared to make her move. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, former colleagues, activists. Some came to see a hero fall. Others came to see if he'd rise. The allegation? Obstruction of federal proceedings and unlawful retention of classified materials. The subtext? He knew too much, and they wanted him silent. Judge Everston leaned into the microphone. Mr. Patel, you are charged under subsection 207F of the Federal Intelligence Security Act for retaining and disclosing restricted information to parties unauthorized by the Executive Oversight Board. Given the nature of your violation, the court is prepared to rule immediately on pretrial detainment. In other words, you may be remanded to custody today. A murmur swept through the gallery. Reporters furiously typed. Patel remained still. No flinch, no reaction. Then the judge continued, smug now. You've made quite a name for yourself in the media. But this is not Twitter, Mr. Patel. This is federal court. And in here, no amount of internet fame protects you from the rule of law. She paused, then smiled faintly. I hope you've prepared a statement, because it may be your last as a free man. The bailiff moved a step forward, as if preparing for what came next. Kash Patel stood up slowly. He reached for a single folder from his briefcase. Then he did something no one expected. He asked to approach the bench. Judge Everston blinked. Denied, she said sharply. But Kash didn't sit down. Instead, he looked directly at the judge and said 10 words that would ignite a firestorm across the country. Your Honor, I have a signed letter from the President. Gasps. The courtroom buzzed. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a second. A letter, he continued, that authorizes every word I've spoken and proves this prosecution isn't about justice. It's about silencing the truth. And that was just the beginning. Judge Everston's gavel slammed hard. Silence in the gallery, Mr. Patel. This is not a campaign stop. You do not speak in sound bites. But Kash Patel didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply opened the folder and removed a single sheet of paper. On the top, presidential seal. At the bottom, signature of the sitting president. And in the middle, a declaration that would unravel everything. This document serves to confirm that Kashyap Pramod Patel acted within the scope of a classified intelligence declassification initiative authorized by Executive Directive 23-108A, carried out under my instruction between April 2021 and January 2022. Signed, President of the United States. Silence. The courtroom didn't erupt. It froze. Judge Everston's lips parted. Her hand hovered over the gavel again, but didn't strike. You expect this court to believe this is authentic? Kash nodded. It's notarized, time-stamped, logged at the National Archives, and, he lifted a second sheet, acknowledged via encrypted email by your former colleague, Judge Henley, 5 months ago. Everston's expression cracked. That name was not supposed to come up. From the gallery, a reporter from Politico stood up. Is that document real? She whispered to another. The second reporter replied, If it is, this case is over. But J.D. Vance, watching from the back of the courtroom as a guest, whispered something even more telling. If that document's real, Everston's career is over. Kash handed both sheets to the bailiff, slowly, deliberately. I'll submit these into the record, Your Honor, under protest because I never should have needed them. I followed orders. I protected the American people, and now I'm being prosecuted because I refused to play along. Judge Everston was visibly rattled now. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the letter in front of her. Then Kash dropped the final match. One more thing, Judge. The classified material I allegedly retained. It's not about agents in the field. It's about illegal surveillance programs that predate my service and your approval of them while serving on the Judicial Intelligence Review Panel. Boom. The courtroom erupted. Gasps. Shouts. Reporters nearly tackled each other to run out and file the story. The judge slammed her gavel 4 times. Order! Order! But it was too late. She'd lost control, and Kash Patel had just gone from defendant to whistleblower. The gavel echoed like a warning shot, but no one was listening anymore. Judge Dana Everston, one of the most feared and respected federal judges in D.C., sat frozen on the bench. The gallery was a sea of reporters buzzing like an overturned beehive. Cameras weren't allowed, but every detail was being texted, tweeted, and whispered into microphones from the hallway. And Kash Patel? He stood tall, not as a defendant, but as a man who had just flipped a federal indictment on its head, using the truth. Everston tried to steady her voice. "This court will take a recess to authenticate the documents." But Kash wasn't done. "Your Honor, before you recess, I request protection." The courtroom stopped again. Everston blinked. Protection from whom? From retaliation, from surveillance, from any agency involved in the programs this letter names. He held up a third sheet, a list of names: CIA officials, DOJ contractors, intelligence analysts, and, at the bottom, a name that made the courtroom gasp: Dana Everston, Judicial Oversight Liaison, Code Black Program, 2019 to 2021. The judge's jaw clenched. "You're entering sealed information into an open proceeding," she hissed. "No," Kash said coolly. "I'm entering facts into a system that has mistaken secrecy for justice. And I've made copies." Boom. The oxygen left the room. In the back row, an attorney for the DOJ stood up and quietly exited through the side door. 10 minutes later, the story broke on Twitter. Breaking. Federal Judge Dana Everston linked to classified surveillance program. Kash Patel is accused of exposing her. The media frenzy spilled onto the courthouse steps. Chants began outside. "We stand with Kash. No jail for truth." "Unseal it all." Inside, Judge Everston whispered to the clerk, "Call the marshal." "For Patel?" the clerk asked. "No," she muttered. "For me." The judge finally spoke. "This court is in recess indefinitely." She stood and left the bench, fast, not in control, but in retreat. Kash remained at the table, and the people in the room? They didn't see a man on trial anymore. They saw something else. A man who didn't back down. A man who brought receipts. A man who just walked through the fire and lit the way for others. By the time Judge Everston exited the courthouse's private elevator, the story had already gone national. Cable news was wall-to-wall Kash Patel. Footage from reporters outside the courtroom rolled alongside headlines like, "Kash Patel flips indictment with presidential memo. Judge linked to surveillance program she tried to bury. The moment Kash became a hero." Inside D.C., phones lit up in the DOJ, NSA, and across the halls of Congress. People who had never dared say Kash Patel's name aloud were now forced to answer questions about his evidence, not his politics. And the memo? The White House confirmed its authenticity within 4 hours. They had to, because the document, signed and time-stamped, had already been published to the Congressional Oversight Portal and the National Archives simultaneously, thanks to a FOIA auto-drop timed by Kash's legal team. Meanwhile, Kash stepped out of the courtroom. Reporters swarmed him. "Are you pressing charges against Judge Everston? Will you testify before Congress? What did she try to hide?" He held up the folder, the same one that shook the bench of federal power. "Everything I said today is in here, signed, sealed, and secured, if you want to know what happens next." He handed it to the first veteran in the crowd. "Read it, because America deserves to know who's watching them and who's lying about it." Back inside, Everston's chambers were in chaos. Her clerk handed her an envelope. Inside, a one-line letter from the Judicial Ethics Board. "An emergency investigation has been opened into your conduct." She tore it in half, and then threw her gavel on the desk. "I warned them," she muttered. "I told them Patel wouldn't break. I told them he'd go public. And they sent me anyway." On Capitol Hill, Representative Claudia Green, head of the Judiciary Oversight Subcommittee, called an emergency press conference. Flanked by bipartisan allies, she spoke with the clarity of someone holding a live grenade. "This goes deeper than one judge. There are patterns here. Documents, contracts, quiet cooperation between the judiciary and intelligence branches that bypass Congress entirely." Kash Patel's testimony just became the spark that might ignite the biggest government investigation of the decade. That night, on a rooftop in Arlington, Kash sat quietly with his attorney and a Marine vet friend from his early days. "You know they'll come at you harder now," the Marine said. Kash nodded. "I know." "So why'd you go public now?" Kash looked out over the city lights, because when a system's been weaponized to bury truth, the only way to beat it is to drag it into the sunlight. And that's exactly what he just did. The next morning, Capitol Hill was electric. Every senator and representative, whether ally, opponent, or somewhere in between, had a copy of the Patel memo packet on their desk. The cover page was stamped, subject, executive authorization of declassified material plus judicial complicity in intelligence misconduct. Inside were 3 key sections. The presidential letter authorizing Kash Patel's role in the declassification process, a timeline of internal communications from the NSA, DOJ, and a select judicial panel known only to a handful of insiders, and most damning, an index of programs that included unwarranted surveillance of American citizens, flagged years earlier but quietly buried. Code names: Black Ember Halo Drift Civ Map, 21. Each one tied to a judge, and at least 2 tied directly to Judge Everston. Representative Claudia Green called for a closed session of the Judiciary Oversight Committee. C-SPAN cameras caught the moment when she raised the documents over her head and said, "This is not fiction, this is not speculation. These are the receipts, and this chamber must decide, will we investigate or will we be complicit?" Applause broke out, rare for a committee hearing. Even rarer, 2 members of the Intelligence Committee stood and applauded too. Meanwhile, outside the Capitol, the crowds had grown. Veterans, journalists, civil liberty watchdogs. Some carried flags, others carried signs. Protect whistleblowers, not bureaucrats. Kash didn't leak, he revealed. End the shadow court. One woman held a framed photo of her son, a war reporter who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances, tied to a wiretap request in 2021. "He warned me about programs like this," she whispered, "and they said he was paranoid. Now I know he wasn't." That night, J.D. Vance appeared on Fox and PBS, the same night. What Kash Patel did isn't just brave, it's constitutional. He didn't break the law, he defended it. The only thing more dangerous than secrets is when judges help keep them. In the West Wing, chaos brewed. The president's chief of staff slammed a folder down on the desk. They're going to use this to blow the whole oversight structure up. The president looked out the window. Maybe they should. Kash Patel returned home that night to find hundreds of letters stacked on his porch. Not threats, thank yous, for standing up, for not folding, for reminding us what courage looks like. 3 days after the Patel memo packet hit Capitol Hill, Congress acted. In a move not seen in over 2 decades, the House Judiciary Oversight Subcommittee issued subpoenas to 3 sitting federal judges, including Dana Everston. For the first time in modern American history, members of the federal judiciary were being ordered to testify under oath about collusion with intelligence agencies and the alleged suppression of whistleblower protections. The headlines were seismic. Judges subpoenaed in wake of Kash Patel revelations. Congress targets shadow judiciary in national security probe. The Patel Doctrine, truth declassified. Judge Everston's legal team went silent. Then they released a single-sentence statement. We will comply. The subpoenas triggered a wave of fear inside the DOJ and intelligence community. Internal audits were launched, staff rotations froze, and redacted reports began quietly appearing in inboxes that hadn't been used in years. But it was too late, because the truth had a head start. Inside Congress, Representative Claudia Green stood at a microphone flanked by Kash Patel, J.D. Vance, and 3 whistleblowers who had been silenced under classified protective orders. She looked into the cameras and spoke clearly. These hearings will not be closed door. The American people deserve to hear in full about how their rights were traded behind classified curtains. These judges didn't protect the Constitution. They shielded themselves. And now we shine a light. Kash Patel spoke next. No podium, no notes. I was never afraid of court. I was afraid of silence. When the system started punishing those who tell the truth more than those who abuse power, we stopped being a democracy. What you're seeing now, this is what accountability looks like. Not revenge, not politics, just daylight. Meanwhile, networks scrambled to cover every second. C-SPAN announced they would offer gavel-to-gavel coverage of the upcoming hearings. PBS created a special called The Patel Papers, What Happens When Secrecy Breaks. The New York Times editorial board issued a rare bipartisan column. We did not expect to say this, But Kash Patel just gave America one of the most significant civic lessons of the 21st century. In a Virginia courthouse, an unnamed whistleblower submitted a sealed affidavit, now emboldened by Patel's stand. And behind that affidavit, more names, more judges, more buried programs. One courtroom, one letter, one man. And the whole system is shaking. At 9 a.m. sharp, the House Oversight Committee chamber was at capacity. Media outlets lined every wall. Veterans sat in reserved seats. Whistleblowers who had once been silenced stood shoulder to shoulder with legal scholars and journalists from across the globe. At the center of it all sat Kash Patel, flanked by counsel, facing a room full of lawmakers with one mission: to uncover what the courts, agencies, and intel contractors tried to bury. And seated at the other table, with pursed lips and cold eyes, was Judge Dana Everston. She wasn't on the bench today. She was in the witness seat. And she looked terrified. Representative Claudia Green gavelled the session to order. This committee recognizes that when judges abandon neutrality and cooperate with secret surveillance programs in violation of public trust, we are no longer dealing with law. We are dealing with tyranny, behind robes. She looked at Everston. Judge, do you deny authorizing coordination between your courtroom and federal intelligence units for the purpose of suppressing whistleblowers? Everston cleared her throat. I cannot speak on classified matters outside a secure facility. Kash leaned forward and handed a folder to the committee clerk. Inside, a redacted but approved for release transcript of Judge Everston's private communications with NSA legal counsel, authorizing sealed subpoenas on whistleblower communications. Gasps. Everston looked at the page and blinked hard. That was not intended for this setting. Rep. Green. But it was intended to silence truth, wasn't it? Then came the moment no one expected. Everston invoked the Fifth. On advice of counsel, I will not be answering further questions at this time. You're invoking the Fifth Amendment? One congressman repeated. Yes, she said quietly, and in that instant everything changed. Headlines hit the airwaves within seconds. Federal judge pleads the Fifth in surveillance hearing. Kash Patel's allegations confirmed. Judge won't deny. Is the shadow judiciary collapsing? Outside, crowds grew. A 72-year-old Vietnam veteran clutched a photo of his brother, a whistleblower turned pariah. We waited 40 years for someone like Kash. Now maybe my brother's name gets cleared. J.D. Vance took the mic next. This isn't about headlines. This is about history. We will not let silence write the story anymore. Judge Everston's refusal to testify proves what we feared. The bench was compromised, and now we clean house. The hearings weren't over. This was only the first session, but already the ground had shifted. A judge had fallen silent, and a patriot had just rewritten the narrative, not in anger, but with truth. By the end of the first hearing, public trust had already begun to tilt. But Part 2 of the congressional inquiry was set to blow the doors wide open. This time, the witnesses weren't just judges. They were contractors, former intelligence liaisons. And one man who hadn't been seen in public in over 5 years, Michael Davin, former director of internal compliance for Centurion Analytics, the private intel firm named in Patel's original court statement. Davin entered the chamber surrounded by U.S. Marshals, not because he was under arrest, but because he was about to testify against the people who had once signed his checks. He raised his right hand, was sworn in, and looked straight at the committee. Centurion Analytics was given full data review access of sealed surveillance documents, not for oversight, for leverage, political leverage. A gasp rippled across the chamber. Judges were briefed, off record, including Judge Dana Everston, including at least 2 federal justices who still sit on active intelligence courts. And the goal? Asked Representative Green. Davin didn't blink. To suppress classified disclosures that would have exposed the illegal expansion of domestic surveillance programs targeting American citizens, journalists, politicians, even members of this committee. Chaos erupted. The room buzzed like a live wire. Lawmakers shouted. Reporters sprinted for exits. Staffers made calls they'd been dreading for years. But Davin wasn't finished. He pulled out a flash drive. This contains communications between Centurion, the NSA's legal filtering division, and 8 federal court liaisons, all time-stamped, all real. He placed it gently on the table. This is what you were never supposed to see. J.D. Vance stood. Let the record reflect, this witness just confirmed what Kash Patel stood alone in a courtroom to defend, that our courts were not only informed, they were complicit. Outside, protest crowds reached into the thousands. Kash was right, truth over secrecy, no one is untouchable. Chants rang out for hours, subpoena the system, no justice without sunlight, Kash for truth. That night, CNN, Fox and MSNBC all led with the same image, a still frame of Kash Patel sitting silently, arms crossed, eyes locked on Davin's testimony, not triumphant but unshaken. One tweet from an anonymous former intelligence officer summed it up. They tried to jail him. Instead, he just uncuffed the entire truth. The House Oversight Committee had seen storms before, but nothing like this. The flash drive from Michael Davin had been authenticated overnight by a non-partisan panel of cybersecurity analysts and auditors from the Library of Congress. It was real. Every email, every contract, every calendar invite linking senior federal judges to the intelligence suppression chain Kash Patel had warned about. And now the pressure was unbearable. The Chief Justice of the United States issued a rare public letter, only the fourth in modern history. We have reviewed the findings brought forth by Congress. We will cooperate with all constitutional oversight measures and conduct our own internal judiciary review. It wasn't a confession, but it was a crack. The Supreme Court, the symbol of neutrality, had just admitted there may be rot in the walls. Judge Dana Everston, still under protective order, was moved to a secure location after threats and a wave of resignations inside her former court district. More than a dozen lower court judges filed motions to disclose prior sealed rulings, preemptively, some to save their careers, others because they'd been waiting for someone like Kash to go first. Meanwhile, Patel was summoned back to Capitol Hill, not as a witness, as a guest of honor. The committee presented him with the first draft of the American Civil Integrity Act, a sweeping piece of legislation that would limit intelligence-related judicial proceedings from being fully sealed, require biannual disclosures of any judge's conflict of interest screenings, re-establish whistleblower immunity at the federal intelligence level. It was being called the Patel Standard. J.D. Vance introduced the bill himself. This began in a courtroom where Kash Patel stood alone, but the truth doesn't stay alone for long. It multiplies, it echoes, and today it reforms. Across the country, the tone changed. Late-night hosts who once mocked Patel now called him a patriot in plain sight. A young student in Texas wrote in chalk outside her civics class, "Kash didn't speak louder, he just brought better receipts." And in a small federal office in North Carolina, a judge named Leon Strauss sat down and recorded a statement to be aired during the next hearing. It began like this. "I was one of them. I saw the memos. I didn't blow the whistle. I buried it. But Kash Patel didn't. And I'm here to say he was right." Months had passed. The hearings were still going. Investigations had deepened. Dozens of judges across multiple circuits were under review. Intelligence oversight panels were being reshaped in real time. The entire infrastructure of secrecy was now being documented, debated, and dismantled, piece by piece. But for Kash Patel, the noise had settled into something quiet and lasting. In a packed auditorium at Georgetown University, he was invited to deliver a keynote speech on national ethics, transparency, and constitutional accountability. No teleprompter, no notes, just one voice, and a room full of young leaders watching history speak in real time. I was accused, threatened, targeted. They tried to break me with procedure, but what they never expected was that I kept the proof. This country doesn't need perfect heroes, it needs honest ones, people willing to stand alone, long enough for the truth to catch up. If you ever sit where I sat, just remember one thing, you don't need to yell, you just need to hold the line long enough for the lie to collapse on its own weight. The applause lasted nearly 5 minutes. Outside, murals had begun appearing in cities across America. Kash's silhouette, hand raised in testimony, with 3 simple words underneath. He didn't fold. In D.C., the Patel Standard passed both chambers of Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support, the largest cross-party co-sponsorship since the Freedom of Information Act. The president signed it into law beneath the same presidential seal that appeared on the document Kash had used to destroy his indictment. Back in the courtroom where it started, a new judge took the bench, On the wall behind them, a new plaque had been installed. Let truth be heard, even when power tries to jail it, in honor of Kash Patel. And Kash? He returned to his quiet life. No office, no campaign, no book deal. But when asked what it felt like to become a national hero, he smiled and said, "I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying not to be afraid." He didn't fight with fists. He didn't win with rage. He stood in court with facts, and made the truth so loud it couldn't be denied. And in doing so, he reminded a nation that courage is contagious, and accountability is still possible.